Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thanks for joining me for this first live episode of Hands On SAP Devs. Very happy to be with you here today to kick off the new year with a brand new topic. The recently introduced SAP HANA tooling for the Business Application Studio. So I wanted to come to you completely live today. Thought it would be fun just to explore some of the new features of doing HANA development in the Business Application Studio and be able to take questions from you interactively. So I'll keep a pretty close eye on the chat as we're going along. If you do have any questions, anything you want me to reshow or you have a follow-up question, that's why I'm doing it completely live, so I can respond to your questions by doing demos live as we go. But otherwise, I'll take you through some of the new features, some of the tips and tricks, and what they look like. Sorry if my lighting is a little wonky. I see that in the live stream there. You're seeing some of my background bleed through. I got some new lighting for Christmas as a gift from my family, and I don't have it quite set up just right yet. Evidently, it was okay for some pre-recorded videos that I did last week, but I see it's not quite perfect in the live stream. But it was too late this morning to redo my entire lighting setup. So apologize if that's a little off. But otherwise, let's go ahead and dive in to what we want to look at today. So first of all, everything that I'm going to do is going to be available in the free trial. So I'm going to be using my instance of the SAP HANA Cloud trial, and I'm just here in the HANA Cloud cockpit, or not the cockpit, it's just the admin screen, and I've started up my system, so I've got a HANA trial backend, and most of the rest of the work that I'm going to do is going to be in the trial Business Application Studio. So let's just go ahead on into the Business Application Studio. And I point out the fact that I'm using the trial today because that means everything that I'm going to do, you can do as well later. I'll point you to some of the resources where you can, and I'll put them in the description as well later. Some of the links, some of the tutorials, and things like that I'll be showing you here today. So first of all, one of the major new things that we see here is that now we've got a new dev space type. We've got the SAP HANA Native Application dev space, and that's primarily what I'm going to be showing you here today. Now, in the trial, you only get two dev spaces, like pre-configured working areas with a certain set of tools already configured in them. And because I already have two, I can't add a third. But I'm going to switch over actually to this is a good opportunity to point out some of the tutorials, the new tutorials that we have for the HANA development scenario on the Business Application Studio. And in one of these, it's right at this point of creating your dev space. And this is where you would start. If you have no dev spaces, or if you don't have a HANA native applications dev space, you would want to start by creating a dev space. Sure why. Oh, there we go. You would want to start by creating a dev space, and you will see a list of dev spaces. You have your choice of Fiori development, Cloud Business Application Development, CAP, HANA Native Development now, Cloud Platform Mobile Services, or just basic development. And I've already created my HANA workspace, so I came here the other day and I chose SAP HANA Native Application. And that's automatically going to add to your Business Application Studio workspace all the, of course, basic tools, but it's going to add the calculation view editor, database explorer integration, the various HANA tooling, and I'll show you a lot of this, new wizards and things like that, syntax highlighting, code completion for HANA development artifacts, but it will also add basic MTA tooling, and of course basic Web IDE functionality. Now you see that you have some additional SAP extensions that you can add. For my scenario, I don't think I added a whole lot of other ones. I was going to keep this particular dev space purely for HANA native development. But of course, if you're going to mix in and do some full stack development, you might add the SAP UI5 layout editor, CDS graphical modeler, although I'll come back to that later. I want to set aside CAP development for a minute, and if you see here, I have a separate CAP workspace, and we're going to talk about that because we're kind of not in a perfect space yet with combining the HANA tools together with the CAP development. I want to show you a little what that's like and where we're headed there. But to start off here today, we're going to talk about the pure HANA native development scenario. So I'm just going to stick with the SAP HANA native application. I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like. So just checking the chat here, see if there's any questions. Okay, good. So this is what it looks like. You can go in and edit these after the fact as well. If they're stopped, you can edit them. So like I could come here to my Cloud Business Application dev space, and I could edit it. And this is going to be the one that has all the CDS tooling and Fiori tooling built into it. But you can see here, you can actually come and add the SAP HANA calculation view, database explorer, HANA tools, and I think just since when I was working with this dev space last week, that they've also recently added the smart data integration tools as well to the workspace. But we'll come back to this later, but I'm just showing you that you can combine the HANA tooling into other dev spaces as well. Save that change. But before we do that, let's go into my HANA native dev space. Good point in the chat. While we're waiting for this to load, feedback from anybody from the SAP dev team reading the chat, it would be great if we could add the CDS language support to spaces that are not of the Cloud Business Application type. I think that's part of what I want to talk about later is obviously there's a lot of interaction between CAP and HANA because when you're building CAP applications, you're wanting to deploy them to your HANA persistence. And today, the two separate dev spaces don't work perfectly together, and agree it would be nice to be able to either pull CAP into the HANA dev space, or what we're working towards is the HANA tools being available in the CAP dev space. But I will show that in just a minute, and just a little bit later as well. Actually, what I'm going to do here, I've got a project loaded up, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But I actually want to start as though I was fresh and I was going to create a brand new application. I want to show you what the starting experience is like. So we're just going to start a new project from template, and inside a dev space, and maybe this is an important point, you can have multiple projects. So the fact that like in the trial you have two dev spaces, and in my case I've set mine up for CAP development and for HANA native development. Inside each of those I have multiple projects that I'm working on at different times. But let's go ahead and create a new project. And while this is coming up, I see there's a good question. I think this is a good point to answer it. What is the recommended project type for a native HANA project, MTA or database? The recommended, if you're creating a HANA native project, is to use the SAP HANA database project. Now, what that is going to create is actually an MTA project. It's going to create the same thing. You're still going to get an MTA YAML, and you're going to be able to deploy it as a multi-target application. But what you're going to see here is the wizard has some additional steps in it to go ahead and create the HDI container instance. So there's just some extra steps that are applicable to when you are doing HANA development. So I think it makes sense, and it's not really an either or, because the project end result that you get is essentially the same. It's not like a HANA database project is not a multi-target application project. It is. That's what it ends up generating. So another question here, still not clear for me how to integrate SAP HANA with CAP. This dev space is only for pure HANA projects. Yeah, I know it's a little confusing, and actually later I will switch over to the CAP workspace and show you what that looks like. And I'll even pull a CAP project into this workspace. So I will definitely address that, but let's look at some of the basics first, and then I will come back to that item. But let's see what this new SAP HANA database project looks like. So if I go ahead and choose that and choose Start, let me give myself just a little bit more screen real estate. Let's just call this DM2. And you can give it the module name that you want your database module to have. DB is the default. I'll just keep it with DB. And just like in the old Web IDE project wizard, you can choose a namespace. You can choose a schema if you want. Those are both optional. I personally don't really ever use a namespace. I think it's mostly there for backwards compatibility. I find that it's unnecessary in the HDI world for the most part. When you're doing pure HANA native artifacts, I might use it only for calculation views, kind of like then in the analytics tools it looks like it did in the old HANA repository world, but otherwise I usually keep the namespace blank. I will sometimes go ahead and fill in a schema name. That way, instead of a generated schema that is just like a it looks like just a GUID, or it's not, just a random string of characters and numbers. That can be hard to identify if you are browsing at the schema level, say from the Database Explorer, you're looking at the raw schemas. So I might well go ahead and give it a fixed schema name, but do know that means that you can't, that can limit your options if you want to fork your project and deploy it in the database, because now you're going to have a fixed schema name in your configuration of your MTA YAML. Same pros and cons that we had in the Web IDE approach to things. You will notice here you have to choose your HANA database version type, and the Business Application Studio currently supports both the variants that are available in the SAP Cloud Platform primarily, which is the older HANA as a service. If you have that, you already have an instance that you're using productively, you can use the Business Application Studio to develop against it now. But also we see here HANA Cloud, and of course if you're using the HANA Cloud trial, that's the option you would use, and that's the more recent version of HANA, and the one that for all new projects that you should use going forward. Now this is an interesting feature here, buying the database module to a Cloud Foundry service instance. If you say yes, then when I continue with the wizard, it will go ahead and create the HDI container instance for me, and it will go ahead and bind it into my project. Let me just, I want to show you this while we go here. Make sure that I'm logged in. I'm just from my, that's what I figured. Bear with me a second while I log in. So I just want to do a listing of what services, what HDI container services I already have running over here. Make this a little bit bigger. So I've got some other projects that I've already done, but I do this because now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say next, and yes, please bind it. It's going to give you the option, do you want to create a new HDI service instance? And if so, enter a unique or non-existing service instance name. I'll go ahead and let it use the one that it generated. Use the default database instance of the selected Cloud Foundry space. Notice I am already logged into a Cloud Foundry space, so the Business Application Studio already knows which space that I'm in. I could do the same CF services here from the terminal inside the Business Application Studio as well. Just to prove to you that we're all connected here, and that's how it knows which CF, if I have multiple, which org and space I want to target. If I would want to target a different one, I could click here it would take me through the process of choosing which Oregon space I want to target. There we are. I only have really the one set up here for my demo here today, so I'm going to stick with that one. If I would say create, no, don't create, then it's going to give me a list of existing services, and I could choose from my list of existing services as well. So that's a pretty nice feature. I think that's this whole setup here with the ability to bind to an existing, that's kind of something we never had in the Web IDE very elegantly. You kind of had to monkey around with the MTA YAML to force it to do those things. It's a bit more sophisticated here in the Business Application Studio, I think. But let's go ahead and say finish on the wizard. And what you'll see is generating the SAP HANA database project. And what we'll see here is if I do this overlay, if I just do a CF services, what you should see here, DM2, it is create in progress. So not only is the wizard creating the project, but it is going out to Cloud Foundry and it's creating my HDI container instance for me. And this will take a minute or so. So maybe while that is running, it's a good chance. Wow, there's lots of stuff in the chat. Wow. Let's see. Usability. Can't see an option to add a DB module and MTA project in Business Application Studio yet. Do we need to add those files manually? Oh, we'll check that out in a second to add a DB module, because I was pretty sure there was an option to add a DB module. We'll let the wizard finish running here, and then I'll see if I can add a second DB module. There's applicable ABAP on S/4HANA are native. HANA, I'm not sure what you mean, whether is applicable ABAP on S/4HANA or native HANA. Question here, how to integrate Business Application Studio with Enterprise Git? Well, you from the command line, you can do your git config and put in the credentials of an enterprise Git as well. We do that inside SAP. Just normal usage. You remember here, things like when I'm using the CF commands or I'm using the Git commands, they're really just piping through the terminal that you see here. And things that I do with the terminal, like a CF target or a Git config, will control where those commands are going. All right, I'll come back to the chat in a second. I see that my service is done creating. We'll see it here. Yes, create succeeded. I know that it's finished because it says my project has been generated, and we'll go ahead and we'll open it in a new workspace here. Reload the entire workspace, kind of give you more of the feel of what it would look like, if you were creating this from scratch. And we'll have our new project, and it did create the database module, and it did create an MTA YAML as well, connecting us up. So this is a multi-target application still. The other thing that we have here is we have this SAP HANA Projects view. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger here so we can see it a little easier. And it shows us, this is where we do a lot of stuff that in the Web IDE, we used to right mouse click, like for instance, we would have right mouse clicked and we would say, build, for instance. But now, or we'd right mouse click and say open in Database Explorer. Now these options are down here in the SAP HANA Projects view. We have the ability to deploy the any pending artifacts to the HANA database. We have the HDI container in the Database Explorer. We can see which services we are bound to and what instance that we are bound to. So we can match that up. We just terminal. I do a CF services here again. You see, here's my service name, DM, HDIDB, WS, SDPJK. That is bound to the HDIDB. HDIDB is the configuration here in the MTA YAML. So what we're saying is, for the purposes of building here in the Business Application Studio, it's going to route us to this particular instance of the HDI container. This is all controlled, the deployment, unlike, once again, the Web IDE, where when you deployed from the Web IDE, it read your configuration in the MTA YAML. Here, we're actually deploying from this projects view, and its configuration is stored in this .env file. Now, if you've done some development with the with CAP inside the Business Application Studio, you know it creates a little file called default env JSON. It's slightly different. The purpose is the same. The formatting of how it stores the data is a little different, but basically this is the environment that you would have if you were bound to a deployer or in Cloud Foundry, and that's what the old Web IDE used to have to do. It would have to actually bind the environment variables to a Cloud Foundry service that was the deployer. In the Business Application Studio, we've actually sped up the process of deploying because we don't need to run anything in Cloud Foundry. We'll actually run the deployer from this terminal window. We don't need to deploy anything to Cloud Foundry itself. We don't need to bind anything. We'll use this env file to simulate the bindings and all the connection information to the HANA database. And then the actual deployment will be done here in the terminal. So it's much faster and gives us the opportunity to more quickly turn things around, edit this little env file, and that changes the way that we're bound to the service. Now, actually, what I want to do here, we had that question about adding another database module, and I think, if I remember right, let me just poke around here. If I go to the command palette, this is where a lot of the additional functionality is here in the command palette. And if you just start typing HANA, this is where you get additional features. I thought there was create MTA module from template. Is there an option to choose? Yeah. If you say create MTA module from template, if you choose that wizard, there is a special wizard for HANA database module. And you can choose that wizard. And it's going to ask you what project do you want to edit, and then what do you want to call the module. For here, I might call it user DB, and then takes you through the rest of the wizard. And now I'm not going to go ahead and bind this one just so we can see it finish rather quickly here. And then it generates, and now I've got a second database module in my project. You can see in the HANA projects, I managed 2 different database projects to 2 different bindings. This one's not actually bound yet, and I did that on purpose because now, after the fact, I chose not to bind it during the wizard itself. I have the ability to bind it at this point. So I just click this little icon here, and it will start a wizard that says, okay, do you want to bind this to an existing service? So for instance, if I was connecting to something from another project, I could go ahead and bind to an existing service, or I could, from this wizard, also say create a new service instance, and then it's going to walk me through that same process of creating a new HDI container service instance at the Cloud Foundry level and deploying it into HANA and then binding that directly. I'm not going to walk the rest of the way through that step, though. So hopefully that answers the question that I had earlier about adding another module to an existing project. Let me know if that, hopefully that takes care of that question. Let me pause here for just a second. Let me check the questions before we move on to the next section. Let's see. Web IDE versus Business Application Studio, which is the one to go for? Any roadmap recommendations? Well, that's a pretty clear recommendation now that the HANA tooling is in the Business Application Studio. That's the go-forward tooling. The Web IDE will remain supported for productive customers, but for instance, we will remove it in the near future from the trial landscape. It's no longer needed now that all the same functionality is available in the Business Application Studio. And for cloud-based development on the SAP Cloud Platform, the Business Application Studio is the go-forward tool clearly. So it has all the roadmap, all the new development. So it's a pretty clear distinction to, if you're doing cloud-based development, to switch over to the Business Application Studio. Let's see. Maybe some of these I'll have to answer textually later, but let me see if there's some I can call out here. Well, I think we just addressed that. When you have the terminal, you can do anything. You're just baiting DJ now, aren't you? Let's see here. The HANA tools were the last remnants to use the Web IDE. That's true. It was the last major scenario. The HANA tools were the last major scenario. Few gaps still to fill there. As you saw, the smart data access tools were just added recently. Maybe if you tried this out 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when it was first introduced, those were missing. We're going to fill the rest of those gaps real soon here, and then certainly the Business Application Studio is the go forward there. Does ABAP RESTful move to the Business Application Studio instead of the Web IDE? Well, ABAP RESTful development, or ABAP steampunk development, ABAP development in general, as far as SAP supply tooling, remains Eclipse based. There's no current plans to move it, certainly not to the Web IDE at this point, since it's really at the end of its life, and no current plans that we can announce to move it to the Business Application Studio. So ABAP based development remains Eclipse based. Martin made a good point here. I think these tools, referring to the HANA tooling, are not yet available in VSCode. That is true. These extensions that are built, you can even see some of them in public repositories like the NPN repository. They are marked as only working in the Business Application Studio. They are not installable in VS Code standalone, and I think here in a second you'll see why. Has to do with the fact that some of the tooling is not completely rewritten as native extensions yet. We did some things where we could take the HTML editors of the old Web IDE and run them in place in the Business Application Studio, and obviously that wouldn't work if you were in VS Code on premise. I can't make any roadmap statements about the future of where that might go, but I would encourage you to provide that feedback, and I carry that feedback to the development team all the time, that we would like to see these tooling available in VS Code for local development as well. But currently that's not possible. It's only in the SAP Business Application Studio. So that is a good point. All right, so let's. I'll come back to the questions here in a minute, but let's return to the demo because I want to show you some more stuff that we can do here. So I switched to a project that has a little bit more in it, where I've already created some database artifacts. And actually, this is from a new tutorial. It's the one that I was showing you here, HANA Cloud Create DB Project. If you want, I will put the links in the description of this video, this live stream after we're done, to all these new tutorials. We just released these at the end of last week. Shows you how to use the new tooling in the Business Application Studio, create calculation views, do cross-container access, things like that. But I want to show you this real quick, the sort of the finished product here. So what we have is, well, first of all, we do have calculation view editor available here. I think you'll find that is, as I said, it is basically the same editor that we had in the SAP Web IDE, ported over into the Business Application Studio, all the same functionality, so no big differences to show you. The fact that it's here, that you create a calculation view, it opens in the graphical editor. Now the difference here is that it gets its data. For instance, if I would come here and I would add a new join, and I would come to the data sources, it is reading the bindings of the SAP HANA project to find the targets here. So this is perhaps the bit of the difference here. So you have to make sure that you've done the binding that of course the wizard did when we first created the project, as we saw previously. That is that's what's doing the connectivity to HANA. If I wanted to create a new calculation view, I of course can do new file and then give it the file extension, but there are HANA wizards. Now, unlike the Web IDE where we could right mouse click and say, new HANA database artifact, instead it's up here in the command palette. So if you open the command palette, and once again, if you type HANA, that'll narrow you down to the HANA specific ones. And right here, the create SAP HANA database artifact. That's probably the most common one that you're going to use. It will help you create any new database artifact. So it asks you, where do you want to target? And I do want to target into not just my database module here, but also some folders inside there, my modules folder. Tell it what version we're targeting, HANA Cloud. You have your drop down of the various different database artifact types, just like we had in the Web IDE wizard. And then, of course, if I choose calculation view, it not only asks me the artifact name, so let's just give it a name real quick, but then there's some additional questions here specific to specific database artifacts, for instance, cube or dimension. I might create a dimension with just a standard dimension type. And when I say create, it will generate that database artifact, and then you do have to come and open it, and there we have our calculation view. And maybe just to finish this off real quick, let's just add some stuff here. Add my fields. Go up to the semantic layer. Everything's already good. And we'll just save that. So I've created a new calculation view very quickly. And what you see here is if I look at my SAP HANA projects, I have a pending, and it's a little there because I have a pretty long name there. I actually have pending deployment. I opened that one for change, but I have a pending deployment here on this test one. And much like the Web IDE, I can either deploy the entire module, or I can deploy just individual artifacts if I'm working on a certain artifact. Like for instance, I'm just going to deploy this test one, so I'm going to click the little deploy button here on test one. And what you'll see here is it's going to start the deploy process. One object to deploy, done. And I think you'll find that's much faster experience than what you had in the Web IDE, where, like I said, with the Web IDE, we had to communicate with a Cloud Foundry deployer service. We had to bind to it. We had to send our content over to it, and then it had to deploy it into the database. Now it's just running the script directly here in the terminal of the Business Application Studio. And we're not actually connecting. Not really connecting to Cloud Foundry at all. And so we have a deployment model that is independent of the runtime here, because the deployer is running completely locally. This project, in addition, now that we've deployed that one, why don't we prove to you that it's there and working? Let's just say open HDI container. And what that's going to do is it's going to open the Database Explorer. Now, unlike the Web IDE, where the Database Explorer was a separate little icon on the side of the Web IDE, it led some people to believe that it was actually a part of the Web IDE. It's not actually. It's an independent application, and it's a little more separated here now. I mean, I click the button, it opens in a new browser tab alongside the Business Application Studio, but not really a big difference there. It's automatically opened the particular HDI container instance that I was just working with. If I hadn't been added to the Database Explorer, it would have added it automatically. It would have selected that one. And if I come here to my column views, click in the right spot, we see test one is there, and I can go ahead and test it. There we are. Just to show you the whole workflow there and the whole experience. This project is interesting because, as I said, we also have cross-container access and synonyms. What we did to create the cross containers, you actually have the ability to just say add a database connection to an existing project. And when I say add a database connection, a wizard starts up and it says, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to add an existing HDI container? Do you want to add an existing user-provided service? Or do you want to create a new user-provided service? So this is sort of that add database service wizard from the Web IDE, but I think an improved, superior version of that wizard. In the case here, I said add an existing user-provided service, and then I can see all the user-provided services that I have already created in my Cloud Foundry space, and I can just choose one of those. For instance, if I want to be able to connect to S-Flight as well, I just choose that, say add, and it's adding it to my project, and it's binding it into my project. So now I've got access to my S-Flight tables, and I can start creating synonyms for those as well. So I think a greatly simplified process there as well. So let me check the questions here real quick. Let's see where we are. Let's go back up. Let's see. Migration from the HANA Studio to the App Studio. How's that going to work? Pretty simply, I would say. If you're using the Web IDE today, you should be using Git, some form of Git for your actual persistence of your project. And what you could do, let's just do one here real quick. Let's convert one. Let me come over here 1 second. Let me get a Git URL for something that I have. Let's just go to this Open SAP Cloud 2020 project. Just take the URL from Git. Now this could have been edited up to this point in the Web IDE. It doesn't exist in my Business Application Studio yet. So I would come here to the welcome screen, and you see there's a clone from Git option. I will just say put in the URL. It's cloning it into my workspace, and then I could say I could just open that folder in this workspace, for instance, or open it as its own workspace. Let's just open it as its own workspace so nobody gets confused. Let's say open. Reload with that project. It is scanning that project. And what you see here is the HANA Projects view read the project structure automatically, and it knows it has two database modules. It knows it has cross-container services going on in it, and all I would have to do now is bind these again. So I would come here. If I'd been working in the Web IDE, my container instances would already exist in the database, so I could just say bind, and there it is. There's my existing service, so I'll just connect that up, and it's bound it, and now I'm ready to develop in the Business Application Studio. I've just migrated my project from the Web IDE to the Business Application Studio. It's just that simple. Now, obviously, I'd want to bind all my services here just for the purpose of time. I'm not going to sit here and bind the other three, but it's the same process that I just used to bound this one. So hopefully that helps you with the migration topic. It's not a complicated or complex process at all. Let me actually switch back over to my other one while I read some more questions. Let's see, and let's try to search under. Yeah, Lars is a good point. There are some ABAP extensions for both the Business Application Studio and VSCode, and you do have the ability now to add those. Now these are provided by Lars, by the community. These are not SAP provided, but there is some ability through community support to do some ABAP development in the Business Application Studio as well. So good call out there. How to create a CDS view for an existing table using Business Application Studio, for example, S-Flight. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. oh, I lost my place here. Seems like it was can we integrate a HANA database project with a CAP project? I will show that in just a second. Lots of interests there. Do we need Eclipse and ADT as well? Or all the HANA artifacts can be developed in Business Application Studio? Well, if you're doing development on the HANA Cloud or HANA as a service, you do not use Eclipse at all. The HANA artifacts, the HANA native artifacts, are all done now using Business Application Studio or previously the SAP Web IDE. There is no support for the HANA Studio, the Eclipse-based tooling. Can Business Application Studio be used for BW development? No, BW development remains in Eclipse-based as well, at least for the time being. What if I build something like a DB project or UI5 project in Business Application Studio? How can I maintain this project? Is there a way to get it from SAP HANA or CF, or do I need to always have Git? Oh, you should always have Git as your backup persistence. When I bring the project into my workspace, that's temporary. You should constantly be committing at good points back to Git. Git is your permanent persistence. The Business Application Studio, its dev space storage, the deployment to HANA, that's either just the runtime artifacts or that is only intended to be temporary workspace. Git is always your permanent persistence of your projects, and you should always be committing back to Git. That is your version management, and that is your permanent persistence. Okay, so a couple other things I want to show you real quick is other database artifacts like HDB table, HDB view. They are of course supported in here as well. We have syntax highlighting now, and we have some code completion and some syntax checking, just like we had in the Web IDE. So you see here now I've got a squiggly. It's telling me invalid table name. Could not find table region. So you're getting pretty good syntax checking as you're developing, even before you deploy to the database. I do have code completion here. It's telling me, oh, you have a synonym with a similar name. Do you want to complete it to that? And then that should correct that error here in a second. Yep, it did. So just wanted to point out that we've been focused really on the project and the wizards and the deployment, but all the same editors are here as well. The other thing I want to show you is about this env file. This is a little personal favorite of mine. We of course still have the HANA CLI tool. Yeah, I have it installed here. HANA CLI. Updated it a little while back so that it can also read this this env file as well. So we have this env file in our DB folder. Let me come here to our DB folder. There's no default env JSON, but if I do a HANA CLI system info, for instance, it will also use this env file for its connectivity to HANA. For instance, so I could do HANA CLI tables and list my tables here from the terminal as well. So this env file is used for the deployment. It can be used from the command line tool as well. All right, let me actually switch out of here and go back to my I want to switch over to a CAP project. So I have to stop my HANA project, and this is going to take a second to stop and then start the other workspace. So let me check the, there we are, that stopped. Let me start the next one. There we are, starting. While that is starting, let me check the chat here, see what other questions we might have. So there's only added. Can we integrate a HANA database project? That's what we're going to look at here in a second. I don't know if I can integrate with a CAP project. Do we need, editing ABAP based upon text files and get no connection. Okay, so there's can I use Business Application Studio to fire runtime commands like on a SQL console, or does this work via the SQL tools? Both. You can launch over to the Database Explorer, which I think gives you a really great experience. You can use SQL console from the terminal as well, and the SQL tools extension can also be used. And there's some tutorials that are out there in the in developers.sap.com that show you how to, like, for instance, set up the SQL tools extension. I just showed the HANA CLI from the command line to browse the database. We're not doing anything mystical there. The command line is able to connect to HANA. Actually, in that case, it's a Node.js application. It's connecting with the Node client for HANA. It's not communicating through Cloud Foundry or any other runtime. It's just making that XDBC, that connection directly to the database, and sending it SQL commands and then outputting from the command line. There's no magic there. It's just using that env file to read the connection parameters. What is the host name, what is the port, what is the username, password, and security settings for connecting to that HANA system. Nothing more to it. So I'm going to bring up a CAP project now. So I've reloaded. Now, the thing is, I could have opened a CAP project in my HANA workspace, but it would not have the CAP tooling installed. So, like, for instance, I would open a CDS file. I wouldn't have syntax highlighting. I wouldn't have necessarily the CAP deployer, or the CAP development tools, development kit installed in that workspace. So I have to switch over to a different dev space to have the cloud application programming model tools. But once I switch over here, what you're going to see is I've added the HANA tooling into it, but we have a few little weird things that we have to be aware of. So what we're going to see here is this is a CAP project. I've added the HANA Projects tooling into the CAP workspace. So I have the same visibility to the SAP HANA Projects. I have the same ability to bind to the database and deploy using the new HANA tooling. So you'll notice here, though, that it's looking at the Gen DB folder. So it's following the structure of CAP, where you do your development in a DB folder, and then you run a CDS build, and then it compiles the artifacts into a separate Gen folder, and then the deployment is actually done from that Gen folder. And this part works. I mean, if I come here and I do a deploy, let me just do a deploy of the whole project here. So you see it's connecting and it's deploying. Oh, and I got an error message. What did I get an error on? Oh, I've got some junk that I put in in my project, probably left over from some testing the other day. Let's see, what did I do? Oh, I haven't done. Okay. The problem here, and I'm going to fix this error, and in doing so, I'm going to show you one of the problems that we have with the integration here, and that's the fact that for this deploy to work, it needs this env file, right, that I showed you before, and the env file is currently stored in Gen DB. So if I come to the command line here, and I do a CDS build, it's going to rebuild the Gen folders. And the problem when it did that is CDS build wipes out the entire Gen folder, including that env file. So now it still knows that this is a HANA project, but I've lost my binding because that binding was just stored in that env file. And of course, now if I try to deploy, I wouldn't have a binding to deploy with, and it would produce an error message. Now, this is a little bit of a nasty workaround, but that does mean every time that I build, my CDS project, I do have to rebind. It does just take it just takes a second, but it is kind of an irritant. I'll talk about this in a second. A workaround that I've found that I use. So now I'm bound. Now I can open it in the Database Explorer again, but more importantly, I can do my deploy, and this time it should work. Yeah, and now it is successful because I had some junk left over there. Now the workaround that I have found for this temporarily, and I know development is aware of this, and they're working on making the experience work better between the HANA tooling and CAP tooling. But I found a pretty simple workaround, which is I just use my own build script in the package JSON. And what I do is I just cheat a little, and I take the env file and I copy it before I run the CDS build. So I just copy it to the root of the project, and then I copy it back when the build is done. So I'll show you this. If I do, instead of doing a CDS build, if I just do npm run build, which will run my script instead, it will copy the env file, run the build, and then copy it back. So now what you see is it is still bound, even though it rebuilt the gen folder this time, and now the env file is back there. So if I were to do a deploy again, now there's nothing new here, but I'll go ahead and do a deploy just to show you that this time it will work just fine. So that's a little workaround that you can use just by running a little alternative script here, and this allows you to still do CDS development. So I'm in this workspace. I can do all my CDS development. I have all my CDS tools because I'm in the CDS workspace. I can still do some HANA native development. If I come here, for instance, and I created a stored procedure in my database module, you notice I'm getting the syntax highlighting and syntax checking and code completion and things like that of the editor. So I'm getting the HANA tooling capabilities there, and integrated into my Cloud Application Programming Module project as well. So not perfect integration yet, but as I said, development's aware of some of these things and working to improve them, but there's some fairly simple workarounds that you can use in the meantime to also use the HANA tooling within your CAP projects as well. So with just a couple minutes left, that's the majority of the demos that I wanted to share. Once again, we have some new tutorials which I'll put in the chat if you want to walk through them. I updated the TechEd hands-on exercise, which you can do on the free trial as well. I updated that the other day to be it was already Business Application Studio based, and it is a CAP project, but I added some additional steps to add in the HANA toolings here as well, and use the workaround that I talked about. We've updated some existing HANA tutorials as well to use the Business Application Studio now, and like I said, we have some new ones, and I'll put the links to all these in the description of the video here. Let's use the last couple of minutes to see if there are any more questions. How to create a CDS view for an existing table using Business Application Studio. Well, that really wouldn't be a problem in the Business Application Studio. You would go ahead and add the database connection just like I had done in the previous example. Now this is in my CAP workspace, mind you, dev space. And you would do the same thing to say use existing user provided service. And for instance, I would add S-Flight, and I would add that to my project. And then you would still need to create a synonym for that file. So I would come here to source, and maybe I would say create database artifact, and say I want to create a synonym, S-Flight, and then I would proceed with creating the synonym. And then I could use that object in a view inside of CAP, just like I would any other time. So so nothing unusual there. You will notice I got this warning because this is part of some of the stuff that we need to work out here with the different folder structures between a CAP project and a HANA project. It gets a little freaked out there. Gives you a warning that says, oh, you're working in a different project than what I think you should be. But then the CDS build copies the objects around. So a little bit of weirdness there related to that, but viable if you ignore the warning and keep working. It works just fine. Let's see how to integrate HANA database. Let's see how to check the error logs in the Business Application Studio. They're right here in the terminal. These are the logs. This is the same log that you would have gotten in the Web IDE when you did a build. When you do the deploy command, it's coming right here in this window. Nothing's different about it. It's formatted the same way, same information that you would have. So it's right here in this terminal window. Let's see. Can we integrate with the CAP project? Hopefully I've answered the questions about the CAP project, that it's not perfect, but there's a few little workarounds. I use it on a pretty daily basis myself. It's working pretty good. Let's see. If you build some, is there a way to get it? Okay, I answered that earlier. Let me see. I'm a little behind here in the chat. Let me catch up. Does HDB calculation view editor work for CAP projects? That is one that I don't think does. It does not open right currently because of this the folder structure being different problem. I'm curious. Let's just experiment for a second here. I'm going off the rails, which is kind of the fun of doing this live, right? So let's see what happens here when I do this. If I think the problem is going to be calculation view, database artifact. Let's create a calculation view, test, dimension, create. And I think because of the weird folder structure, not the weird, the different folder structure constructs of the CAP project, the fact that the HANA project is actually configured here to look in the gen folder, that it's having a little bit of a problem there. Yeah, and it only shows you the XML, and there's no open with the graphical editor. And I think even if let me just try something here. If I do run build, that will copy the artifacts into the target. The problem is here, even if this works, you'd have to copy stuff back and forth, which it just isn't very nice. Yeah, does not open here. This is part of what we're still working on in the integration point. Well, what I would do is if I had to add a calculation view to my CAP project, is at this point I would push it to Git, and then I would switch dev workspaces. I would switch over to the HANA dev workspace. I would open my CAP project, and you can open the CAP project there, and then I can edit the calculation view from that project, and you wouldn't have all the convenience tools of the CAP editors in that dev space. So you're seeing that it's not a perfect scenario here if you're moving between CAP and HANA and mixing HANA native artifacts and CAP projects. But by switching the dev workspaces, pushing to Git and then cloning the project from Git into the other dev's workspace, you could continue working with the HANA native artifacts, and hopefully within few weeks, a month or so, we have a lot of this worked out, the integration between the two. Okay. How is transport management and deployment of the MTAR file handled? Same way that it's handled for CAP projects and everything else really in the Business Application Studio is use the MTA builder, the MBT tool. to package your artifact, and then you deploy it with the CF deploy on the command line. So that's nothing different about a HANA project in that regard. It is still an MTA project, as I showed earlier. This is a CAP project, but you can say build MTA from here. You can use the MBT tool from the command line. MBT. And whether it's a CAP project, HANA native project, it's going to build and transport the same way. So nothing different there. Is Web IDE to Business Application Studio migration still a work in progress, or is it complete? I mean, we obviously have some things, as you've seen here, to work out between the interaction patterns between CAP and HANA native artifacts. But I would say the migration of tooling, as far as how they worked and what features were available in the Web IDE, that's pretty complete now. With the HANA scenario delivered, I don't know of any other major scenario left in the Web IDE. I only am aware of a few small subparts, I would say, like the CAP integration that we're still working on. The smart data integration tooling was just added, as we saw at the beginning of the live stream, very recently. So I think we're pretty much, it's pretty much done there. Almost really out of time. Let me see if there's time for one more question. How long will Web IDE for SAP HANA be available in Cloud Foundry? Well, if you're a productive customer, it will remain available. We haven't announced an end of life there. So if you're a productive customer, it remains available until such time that we announce an end of life. We have not announced an end of life. I can tell you, if you are a trial user, though, we are planning to remove it within the next 2 months or so. I don't have an exact date, but now that the scenarios are delivered in the Business Application Studio, we will remove the Web IDE from the trial landscape here relatively soon. Like I said, within the next 2 months or so. Yeah, so I think that's the majority of the questions. Feel free, if I didn't get your question, if I missed it for some reason, feel free to come back and ask your question in the comments of the video. I'll be happy to answer those later today or whenever you post those. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I hope this was helpful introduction to the HANA tooling, make you more comfortable with it, gave you lots of links that you can use to follow up and try things out yourself, and gave you a little view of some workarounds of some areas where maybe things aren't 100% yet, but we can still work fine, particularly with the few of the workarounds that I showed. The little script example, I have that in my GitHub repos as well, if you want to have a look at that. Content's out there. Try it out yourself. It's all available in the free trial. So I encourage you to try it out, and let us know if you have any follow-up questions. So until next time, thanks for joining us for SAP Hands-On Dev, and have a good day, everyone.